Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's wrap up week 24 and series 3 of today's Tolkien Times with Silmarillion Saturday. Saturdays are our chance to revisit the history and legends of the Elder Days, whether from the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, or more. Now, as this third series neared its end, we moved away from the Feanor Pinata and spent last week looking at the chapter of Men in the Silmarillion. Today, we'll conclude the series by concluding this chapter and learning more about the differences between elves and men. But the dawn is brief, and the day full often belies its promise. And now the time drew on to the great wars of the powers of the north, when Noldor and Sindar and men strove against the hosts of Morgoth Bauglir, and went down in ruin. To this end, the cunning lies of Morgoth that he sowed of old, and sowed ever anew among his foes, and the curse that came of the slaying at Alcolonde, and the oath of Feanor, were ever at work. Only a part is here told of the deeds of those days, and most is said of the Noldor, and the Silmarils, and the mortals that became entangled in their fate. In those days, elves and men were of like stature and strength of body, but the elves had greater wisdom, and skill, and beauty. And those who had dwelt in Valinor, and looked upon the powers, as much surpassed the dark elves in these things as they in turn surpassed the people of mortal race. Only in the realm of Doriath, whose queen Melian was of the kindred of the Valar, did the Sindar come near to match the Calaquendi of the Blessed Realm. Immortal were the elves, and their wisdom waxed from age to age, and no sickness nor pestilence brought death to them. Their bodies indeed were of the stuff of earth, and could be destroyed, and in those days they were more like to the bodies of men, since they had not so long been inhabited by the fire of their spirit, which consumes them from within in the courses of time. But men were more frail, more easily slain by weapon or mischance, and less easily healed, subject to sickness and many ills, and they grew old and died. What may befall their spirits after death, the elves know not. Some say that they too go to the halls of Mandos, but their place of waiting there is not that of the elves, and Mandos under Iluvatar alone, save Manwë, knows whither they go after the time of recollection in those silent halls beside the outer sea. None have ever come back from the mansions of the dead, save only Beren, son of Barahir, whose hand had touched a Silmaril, but he never spoke afterward to mortal men. The fate of men after death, maybe, is not in the hands of the Valar, nor was all foretold in the music of the Ainur. In after days, when, because of the triumph of Morgoth, elves and men became estranged as he most wished, those of the elven race that lived still in Middle-earth waned and faded, and men usurped the sunlight. Then the Quendi wandered in the lonely places of the great lands and the isles, and took to the moonlight and the starlight, and to the woods and caves, becoming as shadows and memories, save those who ever and anon set sail into the west and vanished from Middle-earth. But in the dawn of years, elves and men were allies, and held themselves akin, and there were some among men that learned the wisdom of the Eldar, and became great and valiant among the captains of the Noldor. And in the glory and beauty of the elves, and in their fate, full share had the offspring of elf and mortal, Eärendil and Elwing, and Elrond their child. Now first, we see the ticking clock again. The dawn is brief, and time drew on to the great wars. Then we see that Morgoth's lies continue to reap results, and that new ones add to the problem. It wasn't long ago that we read, "But he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil indeed, while others reap and sow in his stead." But I want you to note that there were 3 elements that were ever at work here. Yes, Morgoth's lies, but also the curse due to the kinslaying and the oath. Yes, Morgoth's lies are a factor, and a big one, but do not miss or downplay the significance of the kinslaying at Alcolonde and of the blasphemous oath. And for you Feanor defenders that might still be listening, blasphemous oath is simply Tolkien's own description of what Feanor did. Now, next we get more discussion about the differences between elves and men, mortality, immortality, the fate of men. It's an interesting discussion because Tolkien didn't originally start here with the fate of men. In the earliest versions of the Silmarillion, Tolkien initially said they did not go to the halls of Mandos and that they were not born again, like the rehousing of the elves. But that passage was modified to read, they went to the halls of Mandos, but not the same as the halls of awaiting where the elves were sent. There they too waited, but it was said that only Mandos knew whither they went after the time in his halls. They were never reborn on earth. Now also, in the earliest versions in the Book of Lost Tales, men would go to the halls of Mandos' wife and be judged, and then sent to one of three fates, essentially, either dwelling with the gods in Valinor, which basically took the place of heaven, taken by Melkor to Angband, the Hells of Iron, or they would end up on a ship that would wander around till the end, essentially purgatory. Now, Christopher Tolkien comments that this is a rare and very suggestive glimpse of the mythic conception in its earliest phase. For here, ideas that are drawn from Christian theology are explicitly present. Kind of glad he got rid of those three concepts. But by the time Tolkien began writing The Lord of the Rings, he had landed on the position that we see in the canonical version of the Legendarium, that men are mortal and must die. They are not bound to the world, and only Iluvatar knows their fate after death. Well, apparently also Mandos and possibly Manwë. At the end, we get this sort of sorrowful looking forward, don't we? The estrangement, the fading of the elves, and the rise of men. Now, of course, this is written as a sorrowful thing because this is an elven history. But we also get the reminder that we, meaning men and elves, were allies and even held to be akin. And finally, the mention of Eärendil, Elwing, and Elrond. That's so important to connect all these stories. Now, for now, folks, that does it for this week's Silmarillion Saturday, for week 24 of today's Tolkien Times, and for series 3 of today's Tolkien Times. Now, thank you for joining me, and remember that with the change in the TTT calendar, you're going to want to come back on January 1st as I ring in 2024 with series 4 of today's Tolkien Times. But don't forget to tune in during the week of December 18th for a week of special holiday episodes reading through the Father Christmas letters. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a lot more. And folks, if you are watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.